I was very naughty. I didn't put my presentation onto a USB. Thank you for the last presentation. I've spent the last week of my life complaining about how we're going to make money over Easter weekend. So it was very humbling to hear what kind of challenges you guys have been dealing with. Really interesting. So I'm going to talk to you about a different type of retail and talk to you about how to capitalize on the e-commerce explosion. Just to give you a bit of background in terms of what perspective I'm speaking from, I work at Zando. I'm the head of online marketing there. And for those of you that don't know, Zando is a subsidiary business of a company called Rocket Internet, which is a German firm run by 3 entrepreneurial brothers. It's an accelerator and incubator business. So basically what they have done is they've looked globally at what e-commerce models are working well, and then looked at markets that they would fit well into. And they have provided funding and skills training and infrastructure to those companies so that they are able to scale quite quickly. Obviously, working in this sort of environment with that kind of support is obviously immeasurable, and that is where I'm kind of speaking to you from today. So who knows what Zando is? Zando.co.za. Cool, that's great. That means I'm doing my job relatively well. So to put it very simply, we're a fashion e-commerce site, and we do everything from clothing to shoes to home decor as well, and beauty products. And for any of you that are Facebooking or tweeting today, those are our handles. So I think when we talk about how we're going to capitalize on e-commerce growth, we first need to look at, is there growth? And I think there was when I first started working for Rocket 3 years ago, there was still a little bit of debate in the market around whether or not we were at the right stage of development. And a lot of people would look at these stats and go, okay, online retail is such a tiny portion of brick and mortar retail businesses. Is it really important? What is really important to note here, and these stats are a little old, but you can see the trend very clearly, that there's this constant increase in that part of the market. If you compare us to other markets like the US, for example, where you're looking at a much bigger portion of e-commerce share, but very flat growth. The same thing is happening in Germany. Flat growth, 6%, but they're not moving. And then if you look at a market like Europe, where you've got 141 million people buying online, and that's 1 out of every 2 people, I think it really does set the stage for what is coming our way in terms of South African e-commerce business. So when people start looking at whether or not they're going to go into the e-commerce space, I think it's really important that they ask the right questions first. So people often start worrying about how they're going to market their business before they actually worry about the infrastructure of that business itself. So these might seem like very simple things, but a lot of e-commerce companies, including ourselves, are still working on getting these features correct. So before you start worrying about how you're actually going to get traffic to the site in order to capitalize on e-commerce share of online space, you need to worry about actually creating a site that is going to attract somebody when they land on it. So some of these key features are things like search. So when you have a customer that knows what they want and they land on your site, are they able to search within your site and find something very quickly? So just to give you an example, this has become a hugely important part of our business as we've grown. When we launched, we had a very small portfolio of brands, and so it was very easy to, in terms of visual merchandising, to show what we had on the site. But the site now has over 16,000 configs, which is very difficult to, when you've got a tiny storefront that's basically one web page, how do you utilize that? And one of the highest used spaces on our site is our search. So you need to have a search that's very strong, and that when somebody types something in, the correct thing that they're actually looking for comes up. And if you don't have that, a recommendation of something else. Then filters, so a customer that has an idea of what they want, but they want to be able to look for it. So filters are very interesting. You get 2 different types of sites, in my opinion. You get sites where you have 2 or 3 filters, so hardly enough to find anything, or far too many filters, which can also be very confusing. One of the things we had to do when we were given the infrastructure for Zando's website from our global office was go through it and decide what things stayed in Zando's website and what things were removed. So one of the most important things obviously being speed of the site. So our infrastructure in South Africa doesn't allow for certain features. But secondly, from a filtering perspective, did we really need to have all of these filters? So you can filter on color, subcategory, season. The options are limitless, but what are the most important ones for your business? Then navigation. I don't know what I want, but I'll find it. So being able to offer navigation on your web page, it's easy to filter through. So you want to make it very clear that you have categories, subcategories, and what are within those. So very simple example is, do you list shoes and then heels and platforms and slip-flops underneath that, or do you list subcategories in between that to make it easier? So it sounds very simple, but a lot of people are still doing this wrong. So you would go heels, and then within heels, you would go heeled boots, platforms, stilettos, etc. So you want to make it very easy to be able to find something. If you've got 15 pages of heels and no way to filter those, you're not going to get a sale. The longer you take to find something, the lower chance you have of converting somebody. And then findability and demand. So if I want something similar, will I find you? Again, this is one of the things I've seen that's been classically done wrong in online retail, is they launch an online site, they spend a lot of money on very expensive online paid methods, so your GDN, your display, your Facebook paid advertising, and then they get sort of 8 months down the line and they go, oh shit, what about SEO? We haven't thought about that. And they could have been spending those 6 months building links to their site, so they didn't have to pay for that traffic. So when somebody types you into Google, you happen to just come up, and it doesn't cost you anything to be there. Instead of doing that, people are spending exorbitant search volume budgets, which they don't need to do. So just making your company findable online is one of the most important online marketing methods that you can use. And then in terms of demand, I think something we learned that was super interesting when we first started, when we first launched our sports category, for example, we saw that in Google there were very low volumes for search apparel terms and a very low conversion rate for those terms. And we launched very aggressive GDN display campaigns to get sort of what would be the offline equivalent of billboards out there. And we saw that the volume in Google actually shifted based on what we were doing. So what's really important is that in the South African market, people aren't necessarily thinking that certain things are available. And so when you come up with an e-commerce business you want to launch, either you need to play into a demand that exists, that is already there, or you need to be prepared to create that demand, and that is an expensive exercise. And then personalization, probably the most difficult thing for e-commerce to get right, but we don't have the availability of all the sensors as an offline retailer has, so you need to think of all of the sort of factors that play into how can you provide them with a human element as part of their shopping experience. I think one of the things I'm going to touch on later, which I think is great, is the idea of co-shopping. So one of the insights was that customers often would go to a store with a friend, a boyfriend, somebody else with them when they went shopping, and they would show them what it looked like on them, and then they would decide what they were going to buy. So allowing for that in an online space. And some very interesting companies in the US have started to do this, and I think that's something where we really need to think about the future of e-commerce. How do you replace those human elements? So people often say to me, how do I know it's going to fit? So we have to allow for certain USPs, so free returns and free deliveries, so that people aren't frightened away from that factor. We have to provide sizing charts. There are online applications now where you can actually input your exact metrics to see if something would fit you. These are the things that we need to start coming up with solutions for if we really want to ever rival offline retail. And then if you're going to go into the space, once you have a beautiful site that's functioning very well, according to some of the things I shared with you, you have to consider some very key challenges in the e-commerce market. So the first one's being sort of around the social elements. So there is a lot of concern around privacy and security in the South African market in terms of trusting e-commerce. So, you know, if you look at our country's population, very big. If you look at the internet penetration within that, much smaller. And people often quote the internet penetration as the e-commerce market. They are totally different things. The people that are transacting online and people that are using the internet are not the same people. They're a subsidiary of that group. So there is still a huge portion of people that are online that aren't comfortable transacting online and that are still getting there. I think our banking infrastructure in this country has done us a lot of favors in terms of making people more comfortable, but we certainly aren't, you certainly can't consider the entire online market as your e-commerce market. And then cultural diversity, so it was touched on in the previous discussion as well. Obviously, you're catering to 11 different official languages. That's the first one. The second one is obviously being in the fashion industry, the items that people wear and what people are wearing in different areas of the country, very different. I mean, anybody can look at, even if you look at Joburg, Cape Town, and Durban style, very different items are selling in those regions. So when you go into this, you need to be very careful of catering on a micro level, especially if you're wanting to scale the business. And then the absence of touch, which I've already talked about, but really important that your customers aren't going to be able to touch and feel the products that you are selling online, so you need to be able to provide for that. So one of the really strong ways of doing that is social media. If you launch an e-commerce business and you have positive interaction on social media, that can spread very quickly. And if you have negative experiences, that can also spread very quickly. I think there's often a big focus on social media in terms of South African e-commerce businesses, and a lot of it is because of the cost effectiveness of using social media. But I like to explain it that social media, if you're doing it right, it's 5% of your business. If you're doing it wrong, it's 95% of your business. Then in terms of economic factors, so obviously when you're looking at e-commerce as a portion of your business, one of the biggest concerns is or should be funding. So one of the questions that Rocket answered in terms of their business model was giving startups sufficient funding to actually be able to scale quick enough that they can own the space before somebody else comes along, takes an idea and rolls it out somewhere else. So funding is a really important one. I firmly believe, and this is an opinion, that e-commerce cannot really be structured as a silo of your business. So I've seen kind of examples where people have tried to do e-commerce as an arm of their business and not necessarily been prepared or sort of been so risk averse that they've been afraid to go, okay, we're going to put a sufficient investment behind this portion of our business. And I think that's very risky. If you're not prepared to put the funding and the resources behind e-commerce, don't do it. Do it when you have that belief in that portion of your business, because it needs to be done right. If you do it wrong, it will fail, and it's not a game you want to play unless you're really serious about it. And then, obviously, size and importance. I already talked about this a little bit, but look at the size of the market that you're actually speaking to. So if you're talking to a broad portion of that market or a niche portion of that market, what is the actual size, and what is the economic importance of the goods that you're providing them? So in retail, we obviously see, and it was something I hadn't seen previously at other Rocket businesses that I'd worked with, but there is a huge implication in terms of if petrol goes up, people don't shop. If it's a public holiday, people don't shop. If it's January, and actually what's very interesting was in January, we were expecting a terrible decline, and we didn't see it in January, we saw it in February. It's like people took a month to realize they didn't have any more credit. But very interesting that so you need to think about the importance of the product that you're providing, because it will be so influenced by how much other expenditure they have. And then skill shortage. So I'm Rocket born and bred, so I've only ever worked for Rocket, and my first experience was at Groupon South Africa when they were involved there, and I was provided with training from our German office and our American office, and I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. And then I started trying to negotiate some of the traffic deals we needed, or the partnerships we needed, and the market just wasn't there. Our media space wasn't prepared for it at all. So they were still charging 450 Rand CPMs, and if anybody that's paying that, you're never going to see any return on that money. So I suggest you start negotiating. But it was I've seen sort of in the last 3 years a wonderful change in that. So media is starting to work more cooperatively with brands, with clients going into the space. But from a general internal skills shortage, so finding the right people internally to run your businesses, and especially your marketing teams and your IT teams, but also in the market, finding the right partners to work with in terms of their skills. And there's definitely been a lot of development there, but it's still something that's quite hard to hire for. So we were looking at, when I joined Zando, at hiring a whole new team basically for marketing, and eventually we started hiring some guys who were graduates straight out of varsity that we could teach. From a marketing perspective, obviously, the learning curve, if you have the will to learn, you really can learn online very quickly. And so we actually have 2 people on my team who are impeccable stories. So the one actually did a promotion for us, handing out flyers at a robot right in the beginning when Zando first launched, and we had absolutely no funding. And we said to the guy, listen, do you want a job, and we'll teach you? And he said, okay, and he came in at a tiny salary, and he is probably the best Facebook advertising person that I know now. So I think, in terms of skills shortage, also looking at how can we create roles for e-commerce, how can we train people, how can we develop? And there certainly are wonderful examples. Another girl was working on our team as an intern. I'd hired a very advanced display manager from Rocket who was going to come down to South Africa, and last minute she decided she couldn't come. And I went to Carla and I said, Carla, listen, she's not coming. You've got 2 options. Either I need to hire somebody else, or you need to do this job. Can you do the job? And she said, yeah, I can do the job. And she went from being a very introverted, Afrikaans girl who was very uncomfortable with sort of working in partnerships and interpersonal skills, and she has, again, also become somebody that is really a strong professional. So skill shortage is something where, yes, it exists, but can we mitigate against it? Can we turn it into a positive? Absolutely. And then obviously from a technical perspective, the security of your website, the reliability and the bandwidth. Anybody who has a website would love to tell you that it has never crashed, but they would be lying. So just finding the right support in terms of external suppliers who are going to help you with that. It happens. It's very difficult to control. South Africa definitely has issues with stability of web pages and being able to have enough support behind that if something goes wrong, you can get the site back up and running. If somebody's in the middle of a transaction and your site crashes, I can guarantee you 85% that person is not coming back. So it's definitely a concern. And then on the bandwidth issue, which I already touched on, when you think of features you want to have on your web page, you need to be very careful not to try and use features that are necessarily being used in Europe or the States because they may not work here. If your web page takes more than 5 seconds to load, people think it's broken and they just close the web page. And then from a legal perspective, obviously intellectual property rights, one of the really interesting ones is validating transactions. So we have a back-end system called Bob from Rocket Internet, and it has different statuses within it for transactions. And we have something ridiculous like 35 different transaction statuses. And it's simply because you obviously want to offer as many payment methods as possible, but there are a lot of loopholes online with those payment methods. So especially when you're dealing with things like returns on product, and we often use promotional vouchers in terms of our loyalty programs, and being able to build systems that can handle that. And then obviously from an EFT perspective, it takes a certain amount of days until you can actually validate the transaction. If you're working with loyalty partners, so we work with eBucks, again, you have to allow for those turnaround times. So it's very important to keep in mind that obviously your gross and your net revenue are going to be very unstable if you don't have a very close hold on these problems. And then taxation issues. So again, an anecdotal story. When I first started working for Rocket, we sent a bill for affiliate marketing. So basically working with other sites, they promote your ads and you pay them a commission for what they sell. It had to go through SARS because it was an international payment. And they sent this bill back at least 10 times because they didn't know what it was. They kept asking us for a definition of what we had bought. And we couldn't, obviously because it wasn't something tangible, SARS wouldn't accept this payment. They couldn't understand what we were paying for. Eventually, we had to set up consultations and try and talk them through this because this wasn't going to be a one-time bill. But definitely around what you're buying and selling, especially from an online marketing perspective, it's not tangible. So it's very important to think about how you're going to handle that internally. And then just in terms of capitalizing on e-commerce. So you've launched a great site, you've thought about all the challenges, and now you need to make a business profitable. And the only way to really do that in this space, as it is right now, is improving customer retention. So the market online is small, and if you aren't getting a strong conversion rate on repeat customers, I don't believe your business will make it because the market will be saturated with your offering very quickly. That is changing. So one of the frontiers where it is changing is mobile, and mobile is a fascinating environment. Sort of 12 months ago when we were working with mobile Groupon, very different space. Now that I'm working with it again at Zando, there's been so much change in terms of even the marketing and the advertising that's available, tracking, which was a huge problem. If you go into mobile, tracking something, you need to have somebody on board who really knows what they're doing because you can spend a lot of money very quickly and not actually know what's going on. But mobile will give us that space for growth in e-commerce, I think. But right now, as it is PC alone, you need to focus on customer retention. And the reason that is because you have a 3 times higher conversion rate on a repeat customer than on a first-time buyer. So something that was quite unique to the South African market that our European counterparts hadn't really seen before was that we were having to bring a customer back to the site several times before they made their first purchase. So in Europe, they were attracting a visit was arriving, they were going, oh, this is interesting, and they were converting very quickly. Our guys, not so much. You bring them to the site, and then, I mean, most of you probably notice I get asked about them all the time, but we have retargeting ads, so if you've looked at these 4 tops and this pair of pants, we'll follow you around with a little ad with those tops and that pair of pants, and that was one of our strongest marketing methods because people just weren't quite sure about this e-commerce thing. So it took a little bit of convincing, and I think that's something that you need to remember the customer acquisition cost of a new customer is far higher than just taking care of a customer that you have. And then in terms of just a little how-to on this, so really important to look at the number of people within your conversion funnel. So at what stage are they sitting? Where is the highest potential for you? Is it sitting at acquisition, or are you already sitting at a state where you've lost quite a few customers and you need to win them back? Recognize where the biggest portion of that is in your funnel and build your business strategy around that. So people often don't look at those numbers when they launch a business, and then a year down the line, they're going, oh my God, we've lost 10,000 customers. You should be looking at that funnel from day one. Every month, you should be looking at that funnel, and that should be the basis of your strategy. Relate to them and their lifestyle, so get to know who your customers are. Not so easy to do online, easier in some ways, harder in other ways, but try and figure out, if you're looking at acquisition, for example, if you need to acquire customers, which is usually the priority at the beginning of a business, look at when they would be buying that product, why they would be buying that product when you work on acquiring those people. And as I said, make database decisions. So base your strategy on where the numbers are. Base your strategy where the potential for growth sits. And then one of the things I think is fantastic is offering subscription services and currencies. So one of the examples that I've experienced in my own life, and it's every month that comes off my account and I go like, oh, again, but it's actually a very clever way of tying people in. So Amazon has a subsidiary called audible.com. They sell Audible books, and they had a special when I first saw the site that if you signed up, you paid a flat fee per month, and you could download any book you wanted. So you didn't have to pay the different pricing models within their site. You would just pay one flat fee, and you could download one download a month, and you could download anything. And I thought, that's great. Like, how cheap is that? So I signed up for that. It's one transaction, but they are making that person is then making a transaction every month for that entire year, which means you don't need to get them back on the site to make the next transaction. They've already made it. So a really smart way to bed down customers. And then obviously currencies, if they've bought a currency and they need to use it, then it's far easier to get them to actually spend with you as opposed to with somebody else. And then personalization, so innovation like co-shopping, which I talked about. It can be really simple things just in terms of your CRM strategy. So figuring out what people are interested in seeing and only sending them that. So one of the big fights I had with Groupon International when I was there was they had very little segmentation of their database. So you would sign up to a city and you would get all of those deals. At Zando, we're very careful. We try to segment on different spectrums. So your age, your gender, your buying preference, what style of product you buy, what size you wear. Another thing that also within retail is really important is I don't want to see a whole bunch of shoes that aren't in my size. I only want to see things that are in my size. So just saying to somebody, what size shoe do you wear, and showing them one half size down, one half size up when they log in, means you've already narrowed down how much looking around they need to do and how quickly they can find something. And then consider the trust equation, so manage expectations. Again, this is always something that marketing generally fights with management about, but manage expectations. I think customers generally value loyalty, so if you have a problem with a delivery time, if something goes wrong, if you've sold them a product and now it can't be found in the warehouse, because that happens. We actually had a stock take about a month ago, and all of the staff from our head office went in to do the stock take with our guys on the floor. And that is one hell of a steam train. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to keep track of product, and there have been situations where we have actually not been able to locate a product that someone has bought. And if you're very upfront and you're honest with customers about where you are as a business, they respond really well to that. It's when you start to not want to tell them and there are loopholes and you're hiding things, that's when customers get upset. So I've touched on this already and I'm going to touch on it again, but just in terms of secure payment methods, online, better to have more payment methods than less, but be very careful what payment methods you load onto your site before you do it. Integration can take a lot longer than you expect, and you need to make sure that you play with that payment method in a staging environment for quite a while to make sure that there aren't loopholes for the customer. So some of the ones that we work with, Visa, obviously, eBucks, MasterCard, EFT, we also offer cash on delivery. This is a good example for where you need to test with payment methods. So cash on delivery is great. People don't have to transact online. It gives them that option. However, on the back end of that, logistically, it's a nightmare. And from a crime perspective, it's very dangerous, which is something we found out. So you need to be very careful on how you work with cash and delivery, where you're willing to offer it, and how you basically work with that, because it can be very tricky. And then obviously check and debit cards. And then you need to provide some kind of secure payment method so people don't feel vulnerable putting their details into your website. Again, infrastructure, I've talked about this already, but just having the infrastructure that can handle a huge amount of traffic, having spent a whole bunch of money on marketing and getting traffic to your site to have it crash, big waste of money, big black hole. So make sure you have the right partners on board that are going to help you keep that infrastructure up and running. And then security, as I've discussed already, make sure that is global, world-class. If you have one situation with somebody who has credit card details stolen, anything on a criminal front, it will really damage your business right from day one. And then you can focus. So once you've thought about all of the business elements of your site, how it's going to look, how it's going to function, that you have secure payment methods, then you can look at online marketing and how that can be effective in driving sales. And just to give you sort of a short sort of guideline on that, generally, if you want to scale a business quickly, you're going to spend quite a lot of money in the first 6 to 12 months online, because you're going to have to focus on quick win channels. So channels like GDN, display, where you can turn them on and turn them up very quickly. But at the back end of that, you need to be focusing on your organic channels, so your affiliate marketing, your social media organic marketing, your CRM strategy. So email marketing is incredibly beneficial, but you need to do it right from day one. And eventually what you should see is a crossover of where your paid channels come down and your expensive channels come down and your organic channels grow on their own, and that builds your business. If you're building a business based purely on the back end of paid advertising, you're going to take a long time to become profitable. So what's certain? Obviously, there is e-commerce growth, and it's happening. It's real. It's here. Mobile commerce is going to open a lot of doors. So get into the e-commerce space now so that when that happens, you're ready for that window, because it's going to open and it's going to open quickly, and people are going to jump on board and take advantage of it, and you don't want to be left behind. And then social media, obviously take care of your social media, because it becomes the backbone of your business. Seen as very small. If it's going well, if it's going badly, it can destroy your business. And then most importance of loyalty. So focusing on your customers that you've already won, taking care of them, making special offerings for them, trying to tie them in for longer periods of time, because in essence, that is what's going to drive your business.